Well, thank you for joining in our session on education and training. I'm Scott Steele from the University of Rochester, and just wanted to kick off with an overview of some things we've been doing in the U.S. on regulatory science training, and then a few questions that hopefully we can explore through the session. Just to start off with some definitions for the work of our group and some of the other institutions we've been partnering with on regulatory science training. We've really utilized and focused on how FDA has defined regulatory science, listed here. That is the science behind developing new tools, methods, approaches to assess safety, efficacy, quality of FDA-regulated products. And we often, for our work, compare that in contrast to regulatory affairs, which is really ensuring compliance, as you know, with current regulations around quality, safety, efficacy, good laboratory practices, other standards. So in thinking about regulatory science, that really drives a number of research-related questions across the translational research pathway. And FDA, through a number of different strategic plans, has defined the areas of focus that they see as critical, both for research and training initiatives in regulatory science. These are some of the broad areas, and Frank may go into more detail on some of the center-specific research priority areas, but these are the broad set of 9 overarching regulatory science priority areas, several of which are certainly relevant for nanomedicine and a number of other areas, from improved toxicology to issues more around novel clinical trial designs and precision medicine, to a number of areas of emerging technologies, whether 3D printing, stem cell-based therapies, obviously nanomedicine, different tissue engineering and regenerative medicine approaches, genetic engineering, so really a range of emerging technologies to think about. So the work that I'm going to mention is really focused on this training component, and where we've seen opportunities to advance regulatory science training. And so the 3 areas listed here, one area that we've really focused on is defining core competencies for regulatory science training. So what are the knowledge, skills, abilities, experiences that we think are critical for those working in this area, where there's been a historical lack of training competencies. And this was an area of focus for a number of meetings for our Institute of Medicine, and really saying that this was a gap that should be addressed. Another around training pathways, so those aren't always clear for trainees at different stages of their career paths, what the training path is, and incentives to work on some of these regulatory science issues. And then part of the focus for our discussion is how to leverage partnerships, not only across different academic institutions, but particularly working with industry, government agencies, patient groups, scientific societies, and others to advance this area. So much of the activity I'm going to mention has really been leveraging a network of institutions in the U.S. called the Clinical and Translational Science Awardees, CTSAs. This is a program funded through our National Institutes of Health, and there's 64 of these CTSAs now, and really designed to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of clinical and translational research. And that focuses on infrastructure to support clinical trials, but also has a key focus on training and education as part of that. Another group we've been partnering with, which Frank will probably discuss in more detail, is FDA's Centers of Excellence in Regulatory Science and Innovation, the CIRSE program, which I guess there's 5 awardees now, and starting to form their own network as well. So we've worked with them early on as part of this, where there's really a lot of synergy in really trying to advance the development of new medical products. So we formed a group of some of these organizations, as well as with FDA, NIH, a number of foundations and others, to share some best practices around regulatory science, particularly as a number of us were developing initiatives in this area, both for research and education, and seeing where we could partner. And the training element was really initial area of focus, particularly developing these competencies. So a number of us had worked on previously competencies for clinical and translational research when translational science was emerging as its own field, so to help define competencies in that area. So we took a similar approach for regulatory science. And one of the elements I wanted to note is that from the work of the group in developing these competencies, the expectation was that trainees would come in with either an advanced degree or already be working in one of a number of fields that would be relevant, whether it's toxicology or nanotechnology, genetic engineering, more of the social behavioral sciences, or another area, particularly for FDA, that would be a priority area, whether food safety, medical countermeasures, or another area. So that was a bit of a preamble to what we had developed as far as these competencies. And I won't go through the process, but really over multiple years, we worked on initially within our work group, and then expanding, engaging a number of other partners from industry, government, foundations to define an initial set of competencies. We went through and did a more formal survey to get feedback, and then discussed those draft competencies at a roundtable where we partnered with the University of Rochester, Georgetown, and working with the Pharma Foundation to include a number of industry partners in providing feedback on these, along with, again, FDA, NIH, and others. So the result of that workshop was to really finalize the set of competencies, but also discuss some of the training pathways and other issues important for training. So we published these competencies, and this is just a broad set of what we finally developed, 11 core thematic areas, and then 3 to 12 more specific competencies associated with each of those areas, covering a range of topics from more the regulatory science priority areas to issues more around regulatory affairs, to ethics, issues around both drug discovery and development, as well as medical device, preclinical, clinical trials. A major area around what we called analytical approaches and tools. This includes a lot of the informatics, statistics, emerging data science and data analytics areas. Communication, both the risk-based communication as well as more scientific communication to the public and other audiences. Patient engagement really fell in that area as well as technology and innovation, including the global nature of medical product development and thinking about regulatory sciences. So another element that came out very clearly from the workshop, both from industry and FDA and other partners, was the importance of supplementing the more formal coursework or modules with ideally experiential hands-on training opportunities, both in industry and ideally with in a regulatory agency, either as a more formal, as a training opportunity in that organization, or somehow imparting that knowledge and experience, co-advisors from other organizations, really to understand the perspective. So partly what we've been doing over the last several months to year or so, both as individual members, institutions of the group, as well as now more across the entire regulatory science work group, is to start to map and align some of the available coursework to these core thematic areas and competencies. So we've done this individually at Rochester, University of Pennsylvania, and other institutions as we've developed programs. University of Pennsylvania has a master's program in regulatory science. We've developed a certificate more recently, and utilizing the competencies to develop that, both what we have as formal courses where we need to create new ones, really focusing now too on educational modules, case studies, so real-world examples that we're starting to develop that can be a really important educational tool, and where we can obviously share some of these resources more broadly. And so now as a work group, we're also starting to map this across all of our institutions and see where can we share some of these resources so that others might be able to utilize them. And so for us, really the focus in trying, and the rationale behind collaborating is really has several goals. Obviously we felt that in most cases, no one program has expertise and is focusing on all of those competencies. So it really makes a lot of sense to collaborate and, of course, share resources. We've been doing this with Pennsylvania, UPenn, other organizations are really trying to open up some of their coursework and modules to make those available. And, of course, from our partners at FDA and industry, Certainly their input in informing the competencies and the training is critical, whether, for the example of FDA, whether for their own workforce or if anyone who's going to be working with FDA in the future to understand what their requirements are and really ensure it's informed by that as well as industry. And one of the areas we're also looking at is opportunities to where we can really house some of the training resources and make them more broadly available. And of course, there's how to sustain that longer term. And finally, how we can engage more global partners. And there's obviously been a lot of activity across Europe and beyond. And I know Per will highlight this in much more detail. But as we've started to look at more recently some of the initiatives from the IMI on research projects that obviously align quite well with regulatory science and been an area of focus for a number of projects that they've really partnered with researchers, regulators, patients, and others, and really tried to inform through some guidance researchers to be aware of some of the regulatory requirements. And then initiatives such as PharmaTrain, for example, but certainly others that have really built this a syllabus and a series of modules that I think really fit quite nicely with what we've been trying to do with competencies, and creating more of a broader network with a range of institutions, just some listed here, that can utilize that syllabus and modules as a common template. And I think really opportunities where we might be able to take a similar approach, building on what we've done in the U.S. So just a few questions to pose as we think about our discussion. Just thinking about where there's opportunities to harmonize the competencies. I think there's already quite a bit of alignment, but looking through those and how we could use them more internationally as a template to link some of our courses and institutions where there's opportunities to integrate rotations and internships. That's something we're doing in some of our programs. Can we do that more broadly with international partners? Take advantage of some of the modules and case studies that have been developed and that we are developing, and try to build those aligned with some of the training needs and make them broadly available. And questions more around the needs assessment. So through our developing of the competencies and the roundtable we held, we really tried to get a sense of the needs from the regulatory agencies, from industry, but would it be helpful to have more of a formal needs assessment? Perhaps that's been done in some areas, and is there anything we can learn from that about the level of training, what different sectors need as far as training in regulatory science, whether it's more formal degrees or really an individual module that really is tailored to different groups, and what kinds of resources are needed, particularly if we want to create more of a portal to house some of these training resources and make them more broadly available. So with that, I will close and start going through. I guess we'll take a minute if there's any quick questions, but I think we'll go through our speakers and then have an open discussion at the end. I just wanted to know our final speaker we've added, who isn't on the program. It's Frank Weichhold from the FDA, and he'll be our last speaker. So any quick questions before we move on? Yes, Frank.
To the international networking. It's certainly a great idea, and I think you have made some significant strides to link in other organizations and also leverage the material that has been developed. Is there a specific focus area to explain and distinguish the different regulatory pathways? Because the European application and review and approval process is a little bit different from the US American. Is that included in any of the programs that you're running, that you're aware of? That's the first question. The second question is, how do you leverage the network that you've built and are integrated in to get foreign students attracted to US universities? Because I know that's one of the major business models, at least for the past decade.
Yes, so for your first question, when we developed the competencies, we felt like it was designed so we could easily swap out FDA and put in another regulatory authority. So under that guess that second core thematic area. So I think that would fit quite well. We haven't found a partner to address that specific area, but I think that would be a great opportunity. And on your second question, I think that was more specific international opportunities for rotations. Yeah, so one thing I wanted to explore with Per and others around PharmaTrain and other groups is are rotations part of some of the international programs, and could we integrate with our network? So within the U.S., we've started rotations between some of our programs and developed agreements to do that. So is that something we could do more internationally? So that's also high on our list, but nothing formally in place yet. Other questions? Okay. If not, I'll welcome our next speaker, Per Spindler, who is the fellow of the DIA, the Drug Information Association, and director of BioPeople at the University of Copenhagen. So thank you, Per.